Warriors are forged in conflict. Legends are born from the ashes of defeat. And sometimes the most enduring legacies rise not from victory, but from the refusal to surrender even when all seems lost. The Mandalorians embody this truth more than perhaps any other people in galactic history. Their story stretches back millennia, intertwining with the Jedi, clashing with the Sith, and carving a path of both glory and tragedy across the stars. To understand the Mandalorians, you must first understand that they are not defined by blood. They are defined by a creed, by armor forged from the strongest metal in the galaxy, by a code that has survived empires and outlasted republics. But before there was a creed, before there was Beskar armor that could withstand a lightsaber's blade, there was a species, a warrior race whose very existence was defined by conquest. Chapter 1. The Tongue, Warriors of the Shadow. Long before the Republic stretched its influence across the galaxy, before the Jedi established their temples and the Sith hid in darkness, there existed a world that would one day become the beating heart of civilization. This world had a name in those ancient times, Notron. You know it by another name, Coruscant. But Coruscant in those primordial days bore little resemblance to the planet-wide city it would become. Notron was a world of natural beauty and primal conflict. Two dominant species fought for supremacy across its continents. The humans who would eventually triumph called themselves the Gel. They formed 13 battalions, 13 nations united by their common struggle against an enemy who came from the shadows. The other species, tall and imposing, with gray skin that seemed carved from stone and yellow eyes that burned with an inner fire, called themselves the Taung. Standing nearly 2 meters tall, these humanoid simians possessed strength that matched their ferocity. From youth, Taung children trained in the arts of war. Combat was not merely a skill to them, it was a sacred calling. Battle brought honor to the individual warrior and glory to their gods. They believed that through struggle, the worthy proved themselves, while the weak fell away as they should. Taung society organized itself around clans led by battle-tested chieftains who had earned their positions through victory after victory. Above all, chieftains stood a single figure, the Mandalore, a title meaning sole ruler. In their ancient tongue, the Mandalore commanded absolute authority over all Taung clans, uniting them in purpose and directing their considerable might toward a common goal. For hundreds of years, the Taung and the Gel battalions waged war across Notron. Cities rose and fell. Territories changed hands with the seasons. Neither side could claim total victory, yet neither would accept defeat. The conflict seemed destined to rage until one species finally annihilated the other, or until they both bled themselves into extinction. Then something happened that changed everything. The ground beneath Notron trembled. Deep within the planet, unimaginable forces stirred. Without warning, a massive volcano erupted with such apocalyptic force that it darkened the skies. Ash billowed into the atmosphere in quantities so vast that Notron's sun vanished from view. Darkness fell across the world, not the darkness of night, but something far more ominous, a shroud that blocked out light itself for 2 full years. The Gel, caught unprepared by this natural catastrophe, suffered devastating losses. Their cities crumbled. Their carefully cultivated farmlands turned to dust. Starvation and disease ravaged their population. For a time, It appeared the humans would be driven to extinction not by their enemies, but by their own world's fury. The Taung, witnessing this cosmic event, saw divine favor in the darkness. They renamed themselves Da Werda Verda, the Warriors of the Shadow. They believed their gods had struck down their enemies, proof of Taung supremacy and their rightful claim to Notron. They pressed their advantage, launching attacks on the weakened Gel positions, driving the humans back across the planet, but the Gel proved more resilient than the Taung anticipated. Despite their tremendous losses, despite the near extinction event that had devastated their civilization, the humans endured. They adapted, they rebuilt, and slowly, painfully, they began to fight back with renewed determination born from survival. Years turned to decades, decades stretched into centuries. The ash finally cleared from Notron's skies, but the war continued. The Gel, having survived their darkest hour, gradually gained ground. Their numbers grew while Taung population dwindled, worn down by endless conflict and the harsh toll warfare takes on any society. Finally, inevitably, the humans achieved what had seemed impossible. United under a single banner, the 13 battalions of Gel drove the Taung from their homeworld. Defeated but unbroken, the surviving Taung fled Notron, abandoning the world of their birth to their ancient enemies. They became wanderers, nomads traveling through the unknown regions of space, searching for a new home that could never truly replace what they had lost. For generations they drifted, growing fewer in number, their once mighty civilization reduced to scattered bands of warriors clinging to their traditions even as everything else slipped away. Then, approximately 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, that pivotal moment when a young farm boy would destroy the first Death Star and change galactic history forever, a Taung chieftain emerged who would reshape his people's destiny. His name was Te Sol Yase Mandalore, though history would remember him simply as Mandalore the First. He refused to accept the nomadic existence that had become his people's fate. He gathered the scattered Taung clans and declared that they would find a new homeworld. They would conquer it as they had once tried to conquer Notron. They would forge a new legacy even greater than what they had left behind. Mandalore the First led his people to a harsh world in the Outer Rim, far from the civilized core where the Republic was beginning to take shape. This world, primitive and hostile, tested even the battle-hardened Taung. But it also offered opportunity. Here they could rebuild. Here they could become strong again. The planet's apex predator soon made itself known. Creatures of impossible size roamed the landscape, massive reptilian beasts that dwarfed any living thing the Taung had encountered on Notron. These mythosaurs, as they would come to be called, were colossal beyond description. Some records suggest they rivaled small cities in sheer mass. Their scales deflected conventional weapons. Their roars shook the earth. They had dominated this world since time immemorial, and they did not welcome challengers to their supremacy. The Taung, rather than fleeing from these titanic predators, saw them as the ultimate test. If they could not conquer the mythosaurs, they did not deserve this world, and so they fought. Using their superior intelligence, their weapons, and their unmatched combat skill, the Taung warriors hunted the mythosaurs. It took time, it cost lives, but eventually the warriors of the shadow proved themselves the dominant species once again. To commemorate their victory, the Taung adopted the skull of the mythosaur as their symbol. That distinctive shape, the massive jaw, the fearsome tusks, the hollow eyes that had once gazed upon a world it ruled, became the emblem of their rebirth. They named their new homeworld after the leader who had brought them here, Mandalore, and they renamed themselves once more. No longer were they simply Tong. They were Mandalorians, the children of Mandalore. This was the foundation upon which everything else would be built: the armor, the weapons, the philosophy that would outlive the Tong themselves. From those early days on Mandalore, a warrior culture emerged that valued strength, honored combat, and held that through struggle alone could true worth be measured. The early Mandalorian society embraced conflict as a fundamental principle. They didn't merely accept war. They celebrated it as the forge in which the strongest were tempered. Internal competition kept them sharp. Each warrior sought to prove themselves, to rise through the ranks, to earn glory through deeds rather than birthright. Yet this competitive nature was balanced by absolute loyalty to clan and culture. A Mandalorian might challenge a rival, but they would die defending any member of their people against outside threats. The Mandalorians began expanding beyond their home world, conquering nearby systems and bringing them under Mandalorian control. They built impressive structures on the worlds they claimed: temples, fortresses, and training centers where new generations learned the ways of war. Their architecture reflected their values: imposing, functional, designed to inspire respect and intimidate potential enemies. Among the legendary figures of this early period, one name stands above most others: Tulak Hord. A Mandalorian conqueror of tremendous ability, extended Mandalorian influence to distant systems. His mastery of combat was unmatched in his time. Under his leadership, Mandalorians discovered and settled Droman Kaias, a world shrouded in perpetual storms that would, in later ages, become important to a far darker power. Chapter 2: The Mandalorian Wars, Revan and the Ultimate. For thousands of years after claiming Mandalore as their home world, the Mandalorians continued their expansion. They developed into a society unlike any the Republic had encountered. While the Jedi Order grew in Coruscant, teaching peace and restraint, the Mandalorians on the Outer Rim forged a civilization built on the principles of warfare and honor through combat. But no expansion lasts forever unchallenged. Eventually, the growing Mandalorian territory began pressing against Republic space. Raids turned into skirmishes. Skirmishes escalated into battles. And battles, inevitably, erupted into full-scale war. By this point in galactic history, the original Tong species had begun to diminish. Centuries of warfare, combined with the adoption of warriors from conquered species into their culture, meant that pure-blooded Tong were becoming increasingly rare. The Mandalorians had begun accepting exceptional fighters from other species into their ranks, particularly during the rise of the Neo-Crusaders. This evolution would prove both a strength and a transformation, as the definition of Mandalorian shifted from a species to a culture, from bloodline to creed. Around 3,964 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Mandalorian clans rallied under a new leader, Mandalore the Ultimate. This powerful figure, one of the last pure-blooded Tong to lead the Mandalorians, proved to be a brilliant strategist and a charismatic commander. Under his guidance, the Mandalorians didn't merely raid or conquer, they crusaded. They believed that through conquest, they could prove themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Mandalore the Ultimate pioneered the Neo-Crusader movement with the help of his most trusted lieutenant, a human named Cassus Fett. This marked a significant shift in Mandalorian philosophy. Rather than limiting their numbers to the Taung alone, they began actively recruiting and conscripting capable fighters from worlds they conquered. Humans, near-humans, and various alien species all found themselves brought into the Mandalorian culture, trained in their ways, and given their distinctive armor. The Mandalorians were transforming from a species into something far more dangerous, an ever-growing army united by culture and purpose rather than genetics. For over a decade, the Mandalorians raided star systems along the eastern edge of the galaxy, conquering worlds in the Outer Rim with impunity. The Republic, stretched thin and focused on other concerns, initially paid little attention to what seemed like isolated incidents in distant space. Even when reports filtered back to Coruscant about entire systems falling under Mandalorian control, the Senate hesitated to act. After all, these were Outer Rim territories, far from the civilization and wealth of the core worlds. Then came the assault on Cathar. What happened on that world would haunt the galaxy for generations and stands as one of the darkest chapters in Mandalorian history. The Cathar, a proud feline species with their own rich warrior tradition, refused to surrender to the Mandalorian advance. Cassus Fett, commanding Mandalorian forces in that sector, decided to make an example of them. The battle that followed wasn't merely a conquest, it was near genocide. The Mandalorians slaughtered millions of Cathar, reducing their population to scattered remnants. One Jedi Knight who witnessed the horror of Cathar would never forget what she saw that day. Her name was not initially famous, but she would play a role in the ultimate fate of Mandalore the Ultimate. For now, though, the massacre served its purpose from the Mandalorian perspective. It instilled fear across the Outer Rim. Worlds learned that resistance against a Mandalorian onslaught meant annihilation. Still, the Jedi Council refused to commit the Order to open warfare. They had faced the Sith not long before in the Great Sith War, and that conflict had cost them dearly. Jedi Master after Jedi Master had fallen to the dark side or died in battle. The Council, determined not to repeat those mistakes, counseled patience and restraint. Let the Republic military handle this threat, they argued. The Jedi Order existed to serve peace, not wage wars of conquest. Many young Jedi disagreed with this cautious approach. They had taken oaths to protect the innocent and defend those who could not defend themselves. How could they stand idle while entire populations were exterminated? Among those who questioned the Council's wisdom stood a charismatic and brilliant Jedi Knight, whose name would echo through history long after he had passed from the galaxy. His name was Revan. Little is known about Revan's early life before he became famous. Records suggest he was born around 3,994 years before the Battle of Yavin, likely somewhere in the Outer Rim territories. From childhood, he demonstrated exceptional connection to the Force, quickly rising through the ranks of Jedi training under various masters. By the time he achieved the rank of Knight, Revan had already earned a reputation as one of the most promising members of the Order, powerful, intelligent, and possessed of natural leadership that drew others to follow him. Revan was also close friends with another talented Jedi named Alec, a human from Quele. The two formed a strong bond during their training, each pushing the other to greater heights. Together, they became known among their peers for their tactical brilliance and their willingness to question traditional Jedi teachings when those teachings seemed inadequate to address real galactic problems. When news of Mandalorian atrocities reached Coruscant, Revan could no longer remain silent. He began speaking to other Jedi, particularly younger knights and Padawans, who shared his frustration with the Council's inaction. His arguments were compelling. The Jedi existed to serve justice. Justice required action. By standing aside while innocents died, weren't they betraying everything their order claimed to represent? Slowly, Revan built a following. Jedi began joining what became known as the Revanchist movement, a group dedicated to taking the fight to the Mandalorians regardless of what the Council decided. At first, this was simply an informal network of like-minded Jedi. But as Mandalorian victories continued and the death toll mounted, more and more Jedi answered Revan's call. The breaking point came when the Mandalorians began their assault on Taris, a major Republic world. The Republic Navy fought desperately to hold the system, but Mandalorian tactics and ferocity threatened to overwhelm the defenders. Recognizing the crisis, Supreme Chancellor Tol Kressa made a decision that would change galactic history. He appointed Revan Supreme Commander of the Republic military. This appointment legitimized the revanchist movement and gave Revan the authority he needed to fully commit Jedi forces to the war. Alec, now going by the name Malak, served as Revan's closest companion and most trusted lieutenant. Together, they led Republic and Jedi forces in a campaign to drive back the Mandalorian advance. Revan proved to be a military genius. He analyzed Mandalorian tactics, identified their patterns, and developed counter-strategies that finally began turning the tide. Where the Republic had been losing ground for years, Revan's leadership brought victories. Systems that had fallen to Mandalorian control were liberated. The seemingly unstoppable Neo-Crusader advance ground to a halt. But victory came at a cost that Revan couldn't have anticipated. As the war progressed, and as Revan delved deeper into understanding his enemies, he began discovering troubling evidence. The Mandalorian wars, he realized, hadn't started organically. Someone had been manipulating events, pushing the Mandalorians toward this crusade. But who and why? Revan's investigations led him to explore ancient Sith ruins. He discovered a facility on the planet Malachor V, a temple of Sith learning called the Treyus Academy. There, surrounded by artifacts of dark side knowledge, Revan began to be seduced by power. He told himself he was simply learning everything he could to defeat the Mandalorians more effectively. He convinced himself that understanding the dark side didn't mean embracing it. But the Iao dark side is insidious. It promises power while slowly corrupting those who seek to use it for noble purposes. Revan felt his connection to the Force growing stronger as he studied forbidden techniques. He became more ruthless in his strategic decisions. Where once he had sought to minimize casualties even among his enemies, now he ordered strikes that eliminated Mandalorian forces regardless of collateral damage. Malak, following his friend's example, also began succumbing to darkness, though neither yet acknowledged what was happening to them. The final confrontation with Mandalore the Ultimate came at the Battle of Malachor V. Revan had lured the bulk of the Mandalorian fleet and ground forces to this world, knowing that the dark side nexus there would give him an advantage. The battle that followed was catastrophic in its scope. Hundreds of ships clashed in orbit while armies fought across the planet's surface. During the height of the battle, Revan faced Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat. The two greatest military minds of their generation met blade to blade, warrior to warrior. The duel raged through the ruins of ancient Sith temples, while around them the war that had consumed the galaxy for years reached its crescendo. Revan emerged victorious. He struck down Mandalore the Ultimate, killing the last Taung leader of the Mandalorian people. But Revan didn't simply defeat his enemy. He took something from the fallen warrior that would become legendary in its own right. Mandalore the Ultimate had worn a distinctive helmet into battle, a mask that had become a symbol of Mandalorian leadership. Revan claimed this mask and hid it away, ensuring that without it, no new Mandalore could rise to unite the scattered Mandalorian clans. Then Revan activated a weapon of such terrible power that it scarred Malachor V forever. The mass shadow generator, deployed by Revan's forces under the command of General Mitra Surik, created a gravitational anomaly that crushed much of the Mandalorian fleet and devastated the planet itself. Thousands died instantly. Mandalorians, Republic soldiers, and even Jedi who had served under Revan's command. The weapon didn't discriminate. It simply destroyed everything caught in its field. The Mandalorian wars ended that day. With their leader dead and their armies shattered, the surviving Mandalorians scattered across the galaxy. Some became mercenaries. Others retreated to Mandalore itself, bitter in defeat and uncertain of their future. The Republic and the Jedi Order had won, but the cost had been staggering. Thousands of Jedi had died, millions of Republic citizens had perished, and Revan himself had been fundamentally changed by what he had done. But this was not the end of Revan's story. Following the breadcrumbs of evidence he had uncovered during the war, Revan and Malak ventured into the unknown regions, searching for the true force that had manipulated the Mandalorians into their crusade. What they found there would transform them completely. The ancient Sith Empire, which the galaxy believed destroyed long ago, had rebuilt in secret under the immortal Sith Emperor Vitiate. This being, possessed of power beyond comprehension, had orchestrated the Mandalorian Wars as a test, trying to weaken both the Republic and the Jedi Order in preparation for his eventual return. When Revan and Malak confronted Vitiate, the Sith Emperor broke into their minds. He showed them visions of power, unlimited. He offered them the secrets of the dark side that they had been studying piecemeal in ancient temples. And most significantly, he turned them. Revan and Malak, heroes of the Republic, became Darth Revan and Darth Malak, Dark Lords of the Sith. The Emperor sent them back as his agents, commanding them to continue weakening the Republic in preparation for his invasion. But Revan and Malak, even corrupted by the dark side, were too strong-willed to remain puppets forever. They broke free of Vitiate's mental control and decided to forge their own Sith Empire, using knowledge they had gained to locate the Star Forge, an ancient Rakatan space station that could manufacture ships and weapons on a massive scale. This betrayal would lead to the Jedi Civil War, another catastrophic conflict that nearly destroyed the Republic. But that's a story for another time. What matters for the history of the Mandalorians is what Revan's victory meant for their culture. Scattered and leaderless, the Mandalorians faced an uncertain future. Without the mask of Mandalore, without a Mandalore to unite them, they fractured into clans pursuing their own interests. Some maintained the warrior traditions, while others adapted to a galaxy where their reputation had been shattered. The Neo-Crusader movement effectively ended. The Mandalorians ceased to be a galactic threat and became instead a shadow of their former power. Dangerous individually perhaps, but no longer capable of the coordinated conquest that had once threatened the entire Outer Rim. The connection between the Mandalorians and the Sith in this era is crucial to understanding both groups. The Sith Emperor had used the Mandalorians as weapons, manipulating them into a war that served his own long-term goals. The Mandalorians, proud warriors who valued honor in combat, had been reduced to pawns in a game they hadn't even known they were playing. This would not be the last time Sith would manipulate Mandalorians to serve dark purposes. The pattern established in the Mandalorian Wars would repeat itself again and again throughout galactic history, each time leaving the Mandalorian culture more fractured and more distant from the glory it had once known. Yet, even in defeat, even scattered and broken, the Mandalorians endured. Their armor remained a symbol of fear across the galaxy. Individual Mandalorian warriors still commanded respect and high prices as mercenaries. The culture, though diminished, survived, and the dream of a reunited Mandalore under a new Mandalore never truly died. It simply went dormant, waiting for the right moment and the right warrior to awaken it once more. Chapter 3. Tara Vizsla, the Mandalorian Jedi. Centuries passed after the Mandalorian Wars. The clans remained scattered, pursuing their own paths through the galaxy. Some served as mercenaries, selling their combat skills to the highest bidder. Others established themselves as bounty hunters, gaining reputations for always collecting their bounties, no matter how dangerous the target. A few clans attempted to reclaim worlds the Mandalorians had once controlled, though these efforts rarely succeeded for long. The Mandalorians and the Jedi Order, meanwhile, maintained their ancient rivalry. Neither side trusted the other. Mandalorians viewed Jedi as sanctimonious sorcerers who preached peace while carrying weapons. The Jedi saw Mandalorians as dangerous warriors whose culture glorified violence and conquest. Conflicts between the individual Jedi and Mandalorians were common throughout this period. Neither group actively sought war with the other, but centuries of mutual hostility meant that any encounter could turn violent. Then, around 1,050 years before the Battle of Yavin, something unprecedented occurred. A Mandalorian child, born with sensitivity to the Force, was discovered and inducted into the Jedi Order. This had never happened before. Mandalorian culture was fundamentally at odds with Jedi philosophy. Where Jedi taught emotional control and detachment, Mandalorians valued passion and fierce loyalty to clan and family. Where Jedi preached peaceful resolution, Mandalorians celebrated martial prowess. How could anyone possibly bridge that philosophical divide? The child's name was Tara Vizsla. Little is known about his early life before joining the Jedi Order. records don't reveal which clan he came from or under what circumstances he left Mandalore for Coruscant. Perhaps his family recognized his Force sensitivity and sent him to the Jedi as a way to forge an alliance. Perhaps the Jedi discovered him during a mission to Mandalorian space. Or perhaps young Tara himself made the choice, drawn to the Force in ways his fellow Mandalorians couldn't understand. What is known is that Tara Vizsla succeeded where no Mandalorian before him had even tried. He completed his training and achieved the rank of Jedi Knight, earning the respect of his masters and peers through dedication and skill. But Tara never forgot his Mandalorian heritage. Even while studying the ways of the Force in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, he maintained connections to his people's culture. During his time as a Jedi, Tara created something unique, a lightsaber unlike any that had existed before or has existed since. Using both Jedi techniques and Mandalorian craftsmanship, he forged a weapon with a hilt made from Beskar, the near-indestructible Mandalorian iron. But the blade itself was unlike the blue, green, or red lightsabers wielded by other Force users. Tara's lightsaber blade glowed black, a blade of pure darkness edged with white light. Its shape was different as well, flatter and more blade-like than the cylindrical plasma of traditional lightsabers. This weapon became known as the Darksaber. Its distinctive appearance made it instantly recognizable. Its Beskar hilt meant it was nearly indestructible, able to withstand punishment that would destroy lesser weapons. And from the beginning, the Darksaber carried weight beyond its physical properties. It became a symbol, proof that someone could bridge the gap between Jedi and Mandalorian, proof that the two cultures weren't as fundamentally incompatible as centuries of conflict suggested. What Tara Vizsla accomplished as a Jedi remains largely unknown. The records from that era are incomplete, lost to time and subsequent galactic conflicts. But we know he earned enough respect that after his death, the Jedi Order chose to keep the Darksaber in their temple on Coruscant as a memorial to this unusual knight who had walked paths few could imagine. After completing his training and his service to the Jedi Order, Tara Vizsla made a decision that would reshape Mandalorian history. He returned to Mandalore, bringing the Darksaber with him. What he found there was the familiar chaos of divided clans competing for dominance, pursuing their own agendas with no coordination or greater purpose. Mandalore remained fractured, and many wondered if the Mandalorians would ever reclaim the unified power they had briefly achieved under Mandalore the Ultimate before the devastating defeat by Revan. Tara Vizsla, drawing on his experience in the Jedi Order where cooperation and shared purpose created strength, proposed something radical. He would unite all Mandalorian clans under a single banner once more, but he wouldn't do it through conquest alone. He would unite them by proving himself worthy of their respect through deeds, through combat when necessary, but also through wisdom and strategic thinking. The Darksaber became the key to this unification. When Mandalorians saw this unique weapon, crafted by one of their own who had also mastered the Force, it inspired them. Here was proof that Mandalorians could equal any power in the galaxy. Here was a warrior who commanded both Mandalorian combat skill and Jedi abilities. Clan by clan, Tara Vizsla brought the scattered Mandalorians together. Those who challenged him found themselves defeated. Those who joined him willingly found their voices heard and their clans given positions of honor. Tara Vizsla established House Vizsla as the ruling line of Mandalore. He took the title of Mandalore, becoming the first leader since Mandalore the Ultimate to unite the clans. Under his rule, Mandalore knew a period of relative peace and prosperity. Wars with outsiders became less common as Tara focused on internal development and strengthening Mandalorian society from within. Statues of Tara Vizsla were erected across Mandalore and on other worlds the Mandalorians controlled. These statues depicted him in full Mandalorian armor, often with the Darksaber at his side, forever commemorating the legendary warrior who had bridged two seemingly incompatible cultures. He became a founding myth for Mandalorians, proof of what their people could achieve when united under strong leadership. But even Tara Vizsla couldn't fundamentally change Mandalorian nature. The warrior culture remained intensely competitive. Clans still jockeyed for position and influence. Succession by combat remained the honored tradition. Leaders proved their worth by defeating the challenges, and those who couldn't defend their position didn't deserve to lead. Tara couldn't, or perhaps wouldn't, eliminate these aspects of Mandalorian culture because they were fundamentally what made Mandalorians who they were. After Tara Vizsla's death, the Darksaber was returned to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant as a memorial. The Jedi Order honored him as one of their knights, keeping his unique weapon as a piece of their history. For generations, the Darksaber remained in the temple, displayed as a curious artifact from an unusual period when a Mandalorian had walked the halls of the Jedi Order. But the Mandalorians never forgot the Darksaber. To them, it represented far more than a memorial to a fallen leader. It was a symbol of their greatest unified period in recent memory, a reminder of when they had stood united under a Mandalore who commanded both respect and fear across the galaxy. House Vizsla, Tara's descendants, remembered especially. They knew the Darksaber rightfully belonged to them, to their house, to their people. During the fall of the Old Republic, when chaos engulfed the galaxy and ancient institutions crumbled, warriors from House Vizsla saw their opportunity. They infiltrated the Jedi Temple on Coruscant in what must have been an audacious raid, and they stole back the Darksaber. The weapon returned to Mandalore at last, reclaimed by the descendants of the man who had created it. From that point forward, the Darksaber took on even greater significance in Mandalorian culture. It became the ultimate symbol of leadership over all Mandalorian clans. Whoever possessed the Darksaber could claim the title of Mandalore, but only if they had won it in combat. The weapon could not be inherited. It could not be gifted or passed down through family lines. To be worthy of the Darksaber, a Mandalorian had to defeat its previous wielder in a duel. This tradition ensured that only the strongest and most skilled warriors could unite the clans. The Darksaber passed through many hands over the centuries that followed. Some wielded it well, uniting Mandalorians and leading them to victories that restored some measure of their former glory. Others held it briefly before being challenged and defeated, their reigns ending as abruptly as they began. The weapon became both a blessing and a curse. It granted authority over all Mandalorians, but it also made its wielder a target for every ambitious warrior seeking to prove themselves. House Vizsla maintained their position as one of the most powerful Mandalorian houses, their prestige enhanced by their founder's legacy. But even they couldn't always keep control of the Darksaber. The weapon moved from house to house, clan to clan, as different warriors won it in combat and claimed the mantle of leadership that came with it. Through all these changes, Tara Visla's legacy endured. He had proven something that seemed impossible, that a Mandalorian could master the Force without abandoning their heritage, that the philosophical divide between Jedi and Mandalorian wasn't unbridgeable. He created a weapon that would influence Mandalorian history for over 1,000 years after his death. And he unified his people during a time when unity seemed impossible, giving them hope that they could reclaim their former greatness. The fact that Tara Vizsla achieved all this while remaining true to both Mandalorian and Jedi principles speaks to his extraordinary character. He didn't reject one identity to embrace the other. He didn't compromise his Mandalorian values to satisfy Jedi masters, nor did he abandon Jedi teachings when he returned to his people. Instead, he found a way to honor both, to draw strength from both, to demonstrate that someone could walk between worlds if they had the wisdom and courage to forge their own path. No other Mandalorian would join the Jedi Order after Tara Vizsla. His achievement remained unique, a singular moment in galactic history. Whether this was because no other Force-sensitive Mandalorians were discovered, or because neither Jedi nor Mandalorians wished to repeat the experiment, remains unclear. What matters is that Tara Vizsla stood alone, the first and last Mandalorian Jedi, creator of the Darksaber, uniter of clans, and a legend that would inspire his people for a millennium to come. The divide between Jedi and Mandalorians remained as sharp as ever after Tara's death. Both groups remembered him, but they remembered him differently. The Jedi saw him as proof that even those from warrior cultures could embrace peace and restraint when properly trained. The Mandalorians saw him as proof that their people could master any skill, including the Force itself, and that Mandalorian ways were compatible with greatness in any field. This fundamental difference in interpretation would continue shaping interactions between Jedi and Mandalorians for centuries to come. And the Darksaber, Tara's most enduring creation, would play a role in conflicts that would nearly destroy Mandalore itself. Chapter 4. The Clone Wars. Maul's Shadow Collective. Over 2,000 years after Tara Vizsla's death, Mandalore had evolved in ways the ancient Mandalore might not have recognized. The warrior culture that had defined Mandalorians for millennia faced challenges from within. Internal conflicts had devastated their homeworld. Generations of warfare had reduced once fertile lands to barren desert. The planet that had given birth to the Mandalorian identity had become a wasteland, forcing survivors to construct massive domed cities where they could create artificial environments suitable for life. In this transformed Mandalore, a new philosophy emerged. A movement calling themselves the New Mandalorians argued that their people's obsession with warfare had brought them nothing but ruin. They advocated for pacifism, for focusing on art, science, and culture rather than combat. They wanted Mandalore to become a peaceful world respected for its contributions to galactic civilization, rather than feared for its warriors. This ideology found its champion in Duchess Satine Kryze, a young idealistic leader from one of Mandalore's most powerful houses. Satine genuinely believed she could reform her people, that she could transform Mandalorian identity itself. She envisioned a Mandalore that rejected its violent past and embraced a peaceful future within the Republic. But not all Mandalorians agreed with this vision. Many warriors felt that embracing pacifism meant abandoning everything that made them Mandalorian. They argued that their culture was built on martial skill and strength through adversity. To reject warfare wasn't evolution, it was cultural suicide. These traditionalists called themselves the Old Mandalorians, but they became better known by another name, Death Watch. Death Watch organized as a resistance movement against Satine's government. They believed she was destroying Mandalorian heritage, and that only a return to the ancient ways could restore their people's greatness. Death Watch operated from the shadows, launching terrorist attacks against new Mandalorian targets and gathering support from clans that rejected Satine's reforms. The conflict between New Mandalorians and Death Watch erupted into civil war around 41 years before the Battle of Yavin. The fighting was brutal and destructive, with both sides convinced they were fighting for Mandalore's soul. Eventually, the New Mandalorians prevailed, and Duchess Satine ascended to power. Death Watch, defeated but not destroyed, went into hiding on Concordia, one of Mandalore's moons. There they maintained their traditions in secret and waited for an opportunity to strike back. As Satine consolidated her rule, she worked to eliminate all traces of Mandalore's warrior past. Weapons were banned. The legendary Mandalorian armor, once a source of pride, became a symbol of a shameful history that the new Mandalorians wanted to forget. Satine even sought to join Mandalore to the Republic fully, believing that aligning with the galaxy's democratic government would help secure peace. Her efforts brought her into contact with a Jedi master named Obi-Wan Kenobi. Years earlier, when Satine was young and fighting to survive during the Civil War, Obi-Wan had been assigned to protect her. During their time together, they had formed a deep connection. Some whispered that Obi-Wan had considered leaving the Jedi Order to be with her, that their feelings for each other had transcended mere duty. But ultimately, both had chosen to honor their responsibilities over personal desires. Obi-Wan remained a Jedi. Satine became Duchess. They saw each other rarely afterward, but the connection never completely faded. When the Clone Wars erupted between the Galactic Republic and the Separatist Alliance, Satine declared Mandalore's neutrality. She wanted no part in another galactic conflict, convinced that warfare only brought destruction. This decision angered many Mandalorians who saw opportunity in the chaos, a chance to restore their warrior culture and prove themselves on the galactic stage once more. Death Watch, led by Pre Vizsla of House Vizsla, saw the Clone Wars as their chance to overthrow Satine. Pre Vizsla wielded the Darksaber, the legendary weapon created by his ancestor Tara Vizsla over 1,000 years earlier. In his hands, the black-bladed lightsaber became a symbol of resistance against the new Mandalorians. Death Watch began actively working to destabilize Satine's government, even allying with Count Dooku and the Separatists in hopes of using their resources to seize power. But Dooku proved an unreliable ally. The Sith Lord had his own plans and little genuine interest in helping Death Watch, beyond using them as convenient tools. When Obi-Wan Kenobi exposed Death Watch's activities and their connection to the Separatists, Dooku abandoned Pre Vizsla. Death Watch became outlaws hunted by both the Republic and Satine's government. They retreated to the fringes of civilized space, reduced to raiders and brigands attacking vulnerable settlements. During this lowest point in Death Watch's existence, fate delivered them an opportunity more valuable than anything Dooku could have provided. Death Watch discovered an escape pod drifting in space. Inside, barely alive, were two Zabrak warriors from Dathomir, Darth Maul and his brother, Savage Opress. Darth Maul's story is one of survival against impossible odds and consumed by vengeance. Years earlier, during the invasion of Naboo, Maul had served as Darth Sidious's apprentice. In battle with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, Maul had killed the Jedi Master Qui-Gon, but Obi-Wan had then bisected Maul, cutting him in half and leaving him to die. Against all probability, Maul had survived, his hatred for Obi-Wan Kenobi literally keeping him alive through the dark side of the Force. He had spent years in madness before his brother Savage Opress found him and brought him to their mother, Mother Talzin, who restored his sanity and gave him new mechanical legs. Now, recovered and consumed by his desire for revenge, Maul proposed an alliance with Death Watch. He recognized that they shared a common enemy, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had ruined both their plans. But Maul saw potential far beyond simple revenge. He envisioned using Death Watch's resources and reputation to seize control of Mandalore itself. From that position of power, he could build an army and create a criminal empire that would make him a force to be reckoned with in the galaxy. Pre Vizsla, initially skeptical, ultimately agreed to the alliance. Maul offered him exactly what he wanted, the chance to overthrow Satine and take Mandalore for Death Watch. Together, they hatched an elaborate plan. Maul would use his connections in the criminal underworld to create a massive syndicate. This Shadow Collective, as Maul called it, would unite various criminal organizations, the Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, the Hutt clans, and others under a single banner. With this criminal army at his disposal, Maul devised a brilliant, if ruthless, strategy. The Shadow Collective would launch attacks on Sundari, Mandalore's capital city. They would create chaos and fear, making Satine's government appear weak and unable to protect its citizens. Then, when panic reached its peak, Death Watch would sweep in as saviors. They would defeat the criminals, restore order, and present themselves as heroes. The grateful population would turn to them for leadership, allowing Death Watch to overthrow Satine's new Mandalorian government without appearing as conquerors. The plan worked perfectly. Criminal forces began terrorizing Sundari. Satine's pacifist police force, unprepared for organized military-level threats, couldn't contain the violence. Citizens grew increasingly desperate as their government failed to protect them. At precisely the right moment, Death Watch arrived. Pre Vizsla and his warriors battled the criminals in the streets, saving civilians and driving back the attackers. The people of Mandalore, witnessing these warriors defending them when their own government could not, began to see Death Watch as heroes rather than terrorists. With popular support secured, Pre Vizsla moved against Satine directly. He stormed her palace with Death Watch warriors at his back and declared himself the new leader of Mandalore. Satine was arrested and imprisoned. The new Mandalorian government fell, and Pre Vizsla, wielding the Darksaber that had been its family's possession for generations, claimed the title of Mandalore. But Darth Maul had not helped Death Watch seize power out of altruism. He had his own plans for Mandalore, plans that Pre Vizsla never suspected until it was too late. Once Death Watch controlled the planet, Maul revealed his true intentions. He wanted to rule Mandalore himself, to use its resources and the Mandalorian warriors for his own purposes. He had never intended to let Pre Vizsla remain in power. Pre Vizsla, realizing he had been manipulated, did the only thing his honor would allow. He challenged Maul to single combat for leadership of Mandalore. According to Mandalorian tradition, whoever held the Darksaber ruled the clans, but only if they won it in combat. If Maul defeated him, the Darksaber would pass to the Sith warrior, and, with it, authority over all Mandalorians. The duel that followed was brief but intense. Pre Vizsla, skilled as he was with the Darksaber and Mandalorian combat techniques, could not match Maul's power. The Sith Lord, fueled by the dark side and driven by ambition, overwhelmed Pre Vizsla. In moments, the fight was over. Maul killed Pre Vizsla and claimed the Darksaber, becoming by right of conquest the new leader of Death Watch and ruler of Mandalore. But Maul's victory fractured Death Watch rather than uniting Mandalorians behind him. Pre Vizsla's second-in-command, Bo-Katan Kryze. Ironically, Duchess Satine's sister refused to accept a Sith Lord as Mandalore. She argued that Maul wasn't even Mandalorian, that his claim to leadership, while technically valid by their traditions, violated everything their culture stood for. About half of Death Watch followed Bo-Katan, becoming the Night Owls and opposing Maul's rule. The other half of Death Watch, however, accepted Maul as their leader. These warriors, who became known as Maul's Super Commandos, modified their armor to display red and black colors representing their new master. Some even added horns to their helmets mimicking Maul's own crown of Zabrak horns. They served Maul fanatically, becoming the enforcers of his rule over Mandalore. Maul installed Prime Minister Almec, a corrupt new Mandalorian official, as his puppet ruler. This gave his regime a veneer of legitimacy, while Maul pulled strings from the shadows. For a time, Maul's plan succeeded perfectly. He controlled Mandalore through Death Watch and Almec. He commanded the Shadow Collective's criminal networks, and he had drawn Obi-Wan Kenobi into his trap. Unable to resist the opportunity for revenge, Maul brought Satine before Obi-Wan and killed her with the Darksaber while the Jedi Master watched helplessly, imprisoned and unable to intervene. It was a moment of pure spite, Maul's revenge for Obi-Wan having taken so much from him years earlier on Naboo. Bo-Katan helped Obi-Wan escape, asking him to bring the Republic to liberate Mandalore from Maul's grip. But before the Republic could respond, Maul's former master made his own move. Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who had trained Maul years earlier and whom Maul had betrayed by striking out on his own, traveled to Mandalore personally. In the throne room where Maul had been consolidating his power, Sidious confronted his former apprentice. The duel that followed demonstrated the vast gulf between a Sith apprentice and a true Dark Lord of the Sith. Despite Maul and Savage Opress fighting together, despite all of Maul's growth in power and skill, Sidious defeated them both. He killed Savage Opress and took Maul prisoner, intended to punish his former student's presumption. Mandalore fell into chaos once more. The Super Commandos who had served Maul scattered or went into hiding. Bo-Katan's Night Owls continued resisting, but they no longer had the strength to retake the planet alone, and the galaxy at large, consumed by the Clone Wars, had little attention to spare for one world's internal conflicts no matter how strategic Mandalore might be. Eventually, near the end of the Clone Wars, the Republic did mount an assault to liberate Mandalore, the siege of Mandalore that would become legendary. But by then, Maul had been freed by loyalist Mandalorians led by Prime Minister Almec. He had escaped Sidious's captivity and returned to what he still considered his throne. Bo-Katan allied with the Republic, providing Jedi Commander Ahsoka Tano and Clone Commander Rex with Mandalorian forces for the assault. The battle for Mandalore was fierce and decisive. Ahsoka Tano, wielding twin lightsabers and leading the 302nd Company of clone troopers, fought through Sundari to confront Maul. The Sith warrior, sensing through the Force that greater catastrophes were about to unfold, tried to convince Ahsoka to join him against their common enemy, Darth Sidious, who Maul knew would soon betray everyone. But Ahsoka couldn't ally with someone like Maul, regardless of his warnings. In their duel, Ahsoka defeated Maul and captured him. The siege of Mandalore ended with the Shadow Collective's control broken and Maul in Republic custody. Bo-Katan, having fought alongside the Republic forces, found herself in position to claim leadership of Mandalore. Her sister Satine's death, Pre Vizsla's fall, and her own role in liberating their homeworld gave her both the legitimacy and the support to unite the clans once more. But the victory came at a terrible cost, and its timing couldn't have been worse. As Ahsoka prepared to transport Maul back to Coruscant for trial, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, who was in fact Darth Sidious himself, activated Order 66. Across the galaxy, clone troopers turned on their Jedi commanders, attempted to execute them all in accordance with secret programming. The Clone Wars ended not with the defeat of the Separatists, but with the destruction of the Jedi Order and the transformation of the Republic into the Galactic Empire. Mandalore, having just regained its freedom from one Sith Lord's control, suddenly found itself under the authority of another. The galaxy had changed forever, and Mandalore's connection to the Sith, which had shaped so much of their history from the Mandalorian Wars through Maul's brief reign, was about to enter its darkest chapter yet. Bo-Katan Kryze, taking control of a war-torn world, faced the impossible task of rebuilding Mandalore while navigating the dangerous new galactic order. She didn't know it yet, but the empire she now found herself part of would prove far more ruthless than any enemy Mandalore had ever faced. The night of 1,000 tears was still to come. But that is a story for the next chapter of Mandalorian history. Chapter 5. The Empire, Night of 1,000 Tears. When the Clone Wars ended and the Galactic Republic transformed into the Galactic Empire under Emperor Palpatine's rule, Mandalore found itself in a precarious position. Bo-Katan Kryze had just reclaimed her homeworld with Republic assistance, but that Republic no longer existed. The Empire, forged by a Sith Lord who had orchestrated a galactic war to seize power, now controlled virtually every system in known space. Initially, the Empire allowed Mandalore a measure of autonomy. Bo-Katan maintained leadership over her people, attempting to rebuild after the devastation of recent conflicts. She knew the Empire posed a threat, but Mandalore was in no position to resist openly. Their world was still recovering. Their people were divided between those who had supported the new Mandalorians, those who had joined Death Watch, and countless smaller factions with their own grievances and agendas. The Emperor, meanwhile, saw Mandalore differently than most worlds, He recognized that Mandalorians, despite their fractured state, remained dangerous. Their warrior culture, their combat skills, and their legendary armor made them potential threats if they ever unified under strong leadership. Palpatine decided that Mandalore needed to be controlled, transformed into another imperial client state, stripped of its independence and military traditions. The Empire began with subtle measures. Imperial advisors arrived on Mandalore offering assistance with rebuilding. Stormtrooper garrisons were established ostensibly to help maintain order. The Empire introduced regulations restricting weapons production and mandating that all Beskar mining operations report to Imperial authorities. These weren't presented as punishments, but as reasonable measures to help integrate Mandalore into the new galactic order. Bo-Katan resisted where she could, but she understood the reality of their situation. The Empire commanded a military force that dwarfed anything Mandalore could muster. Open rebellion would mean annihilation. She tried to walk a careful line, maintaining Mandalorian traditions while complying with enough Imperial demands to avoid giving the Empire reason to crack down harder. But the Empire's patience was limited. When Bo-Katan refused direct Imperial authority, Emperor Palpatine replaced her. He installed Gar Saxon, one of Maul's former super-commandos, as the new Imperial Viceroy of Mandalore. Saxon had betrayed his own people by allying with the Empire, seeing it as his path to power. Under his rule, Mandalore became increasingly oppressive. Saxon enforced Imperial law with ruthless efficiency, crushing any dissent and hunting down Mandalorians who refused to submit. This Imperial occupation galvanized some Mandalorians to resistance. Clans that had fought each other for generations found common cause against the Empire. Bo-Katan formed a resistance movement, working underground to oppose Saxon and the Imperial forces. Other Mandalorian warriors joined her, including members of Clan Wren, particularly a young warrior named Sabine Wren. Sabine's story represents both the tragedy and hope of this era. A talented artist and weapons designer, she had attended the Imperial Academy on Mandalore, genuinely believing she could serve her people within the Imperial structure. But she created a weapon that the Empire then turned against her own people, the Arc Pulse Generator, a device that specifically targeted Beskar armor, superheating it and killing whoever wore it. Horrified by what her invention had been used for, Sabine deserted the Empire and eventually joined a growing rebellion against Imperial rule. Years of struggle followed. Sabine joined a rebel cell led by Jedi survivor Kanan Jarrus and pilot Hera Syndulla, participating in operations across the Outer Rim. She learned lightsaber combat from Kanan, an irony not lost on her, a Mandalorian learning from a Jedi, much as Tara Vizsla had done 1,000 years earlier. During her time with the rebels, Sabine discovered the Darksaber on Dathomir, hidden in a place where Darth Maul had once kept his treasures. The discovery of the Darksaber changed everything. This wasn't just another weapon. This was the symbol of Mandalorian unity, the blade that had united clans under Tara Vizsla and represented legitimate leadership over all Mandalorians. Sabine, though reluctant at first, eventually accepted the weapon's significance. She trained with it, learning not just how to wield the Darksaber physically, but understanding what it meant to carry its burden. With the Darksaber, Sabine returned to Mandalore. Her presence, wielding the legendary weapon, inspired other clans to join the resistance. Even Mandalorians who had initially accepted Imperial rule began questioning their cooperation. The Darksaber's symbolism was powerful. Here was proof that Mandalorians could resist, that they could reclaim their heritage from the Empire that sought to erase it. The conflict came to a head when Sabine used the Darksaber to defeat Gar Saxon in combat. By Mandalorian tradition, this victory should have made her leader of Mandalore, but Sabine had never sought that position. She was a warrior and an artist, not a ruler. She recognized that someone else was better suited to unite the clans and lead Mandalore forward. Someone who had been fighting for their people longer than anyone, who had refused to surrender even when defeating the Empire seemed impossible. Sabine offered the Darksaber to Bo-Katan Kryze. This moment was significant for reasons beyond the obvious. The Darksaber, according to ancient tradition, could only be claimed through combat victory. Gifting it was unprecedented. Some Mandalorians accepted Sabine's choice, viewing it as a pragmatic decision during wartime. Others harbored doubts about whether Bo-Katan's claim to leadership was truly legitimate if she hadn't won the Darksaber herself. But in that moment, facing a common enemy, most Mandalorians rallied behind Bo-Katan. She accepted the Darksaber, and with it, the title of Mandalore. Multiple clans pledged their support. For the first time in decades, Mandalore stood united against external oppression. And their enemy wasn't some criminal syndicate or rival faction. It was the Empire itself, the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known. Bo-Katan led her forces against the Imperial garrison on Mandalore. In a series of coordinated strikes, Mandalorian warriors freed their homeworld from Imperial control. They destroyed the Imperial installations. They drove out the stormtrooper occupiers. For a brief, glorious moment, Mandalore was free again. Bo-Katan stood as Mandalore, wielding the Darksaber, leading her people as they rebuilt and reclaimed their identity. But the Empire never forgot, and the Empire never forgave resistance. Years passed. The galactic civil war between the Empire and the Rebel Alliance consumed the galaxy. At the Battle of Endor, the Rebel Alliance achieved what many thought impossible. They destroyed the second Death Star and killed Emperor Palpatine. The Empire fractured, losing its central authority. Many believed this meant freedom for worlds that had suffered under Imperial tyranny. They were wrong. Emperor Palpatine, even in death, had planned for this contingency. Before the Battle of Endor, he had issued contingency orders to his most loyal officers. If he died, they were to execute Operation Cinder, a scorched earth campaign designed to punish the galaxy for failing to protect their emperor. Imperial forces across the galaxy began attacking their own worlds, destroying infrastructure and civilian populations in acts of spite and revenge. Mandalore became a target not just because of Operation Cinder, but because the Empire had never forgiven the Mandalorians for their successful rebellion. An Imperial officer named Moff Gideon, a member of the Imperial Security Bureau, took personal interest in Mandalore. Gideon had fought against Mandalorians before. He understood their culture, their strengths, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Gideon reached out to Bo-Katan with an offer. The ISB proposed a ceasefire in exchange for Mandalore disarming and submitting to limited Imperial authority. The Empire would spare the population and allow the major cities to continue functioning. Bo-Katan, seeing Imperial forces massing around her system and knowing that renewed warfare would devastate her already war-weary people, reluctantly agreed to negotiate. The meeting took place in secret. Bo-Katan arrived with the Darksaber, her symbol of authority, believing she could secure acceptable terms for her people. She was wrong. Moff Gideon's offer had been a trap, a way to get Bo-Katan to reveal herself and lower her guard. As soon as negotiations began, Gideon betrayed her. Imperial forces attacked while Bo-Katan was away from her command center. And worse, Gideon took the Darksaber from her, claiming it as a trophy of the Empire's victory. What followed would be remembered by Mandalorians forever after as the Night of 1,000 Tears. Some called it the Great Purge. Whatever name it bore, the event represented the darkest moment in Mandalorian history since the devastating defeat by Revan thousands of years earlier. The Imperial Navy descended on Mandalore with overwhelming force. Squadrons of TIE SA bombers blackened the skies over Sundari and other major cities. These weren't surgical strikes against military targets. These were terror weapons designed to inflict maximum civilian casualties. The bombers dropped fusion bombs across the planet's surface, creating firestorms that consumed entire city blocks. Mandalorians fought back desperately. Warriors wearing their Beskar armor engaged Imperial forces in the streets, attempting to protect civilians and defend their homes. But they were hopelessly outnumbered. For every stormtrooper they killed, 10 more took their place. The bombing continued relentlessly, reducing Mandalore's carefully constructed cities to rubble. Moff Gideon personally commanded the operation, ensuring that the assault was thorough and brutal. After the bombers had done their work, he deployed ground forces, not just stormtroopers, but KX-series security droids and Viper probe droids programmed to hunt down survivors. These droids scoured through the wreckage of Mandalorian cities, methodically executing anyone they found hiding in the ruins. Men, women, children. The droids didn't discriminate. They simply followed their programming: eliminate all Mandalorians. Fields of Mandalorian recruits, young warriors training to defend their people, were attacked by Imperial gunships equipped with heavy repeating blasters. The recruits, many of them barely more than children, had no chance against the aerial assault. They died by the hundreds, cut down by fire from above, while their instructors desperately tried to organize defense or evacuation. The bombardment continued through the night. Fires lit the Mandalorian sky, visible from space as the planet's major population centers burned. The domed cities that had been constructed over decades to protect Mandalorians from their harsh world crumbled under Imperial assault. The careful civilization that had survived wars and catastrophes for thousands of years was systematically destroyed in a single night of merciless violence. By dawn, the Night of 1,000 Tears had ended, not because the Empire had shown mercy or because Mandalorian resistance had driven them back, but because there were simply no more major targets left to destroy. Sundari, the capital city where Duchess Satine had once promoted peace and where Maul had briefly ruled through terror, was gone, reduced to a crater and scattered ruins. Other cities had suffered similar fates. The Mandalorian population had been decimated. Millions died in the bombardment and the subsequent hunting of survivors. The few Mandalorians who survived the Night of 1,000 Tears faced an impossible choice. They could remain on their devastated homeworld, hiding in the ruins of their civilization while Imperial droids continued their grim work, or They could flee into the galaxy as refugees, abandoning Mandalore to the Empire. Most chose survival. They scattered to distant systems, going deep into hiding to avoid Imperial hunters who continued searching for escaped Mandalorians. Some Mandalorians hadn't been on their home world during the Purge. Clans that had been operating on other worlds, mercenaries and bounty hunters working throughout the galaxy, warriors who had left Mandalore before the Empire's assault, these survivors received news of the catastrophe with horror and grief. Their entire culture, their home world, their people, all nearly destroyed in a single night. The Empire declared Mandalore uninhabitable. They spread propaganda suggesting that the planet had been destroyed by Mandalorian weapons, not Imperial forces. They claimed that Mandalorian terrorists had brought this destruction on themselves through their refusal to accept peaceful Imperial rule. Some in the galaxy believed these lies. Others knew the truth but lacked the power to seek justice against the Empire. Bo-Katan Kryze survived the Night of 1,000 Tears, but she carried the burden of what had happened. She had negotiated with Gideon, trying to save her people, and instead had provided the Empire with the opportunity to nearly annihilate them. She had lost the Darksaber, the symbol of Mandalorian unity, and she had been powerless to prevent the destruction of everything she had fought to protect for so long. Many surviving Mandalorians blamed Bo-Katan for the disaster. They argued that she should never have negotiated with the Empire, that she should have fought to the last warrior rather than compromise. Others pointed to the fact that she hadn't won the Darksaber in combat, but had received it as a gift. Had this violated ancient traditions and brought a curse upon Mandalore? These questions would haunt the surviving Mandalorian clans for years to come. The Great Purge accomplished what the Empire had intended. Mandalore, as a unified threat, ceased to exist. The surviving Mandalorians were scattered, isolated, and too few in number to pose any significant challenge to Imperial authority. Their legendary armor, their combat skills, their proud traditions, these endured in individuals and small groups, but as a culture, as a people capable of shaping galactic events, the Mandalorians had been broken. Yet, even in their darkest hour, even with their homeworld devastated and their population reduced to scattered remnants, the Mandalorians refused to vanish entirely. Survival became their new war, and some among them clung to hope that one day, somehow, Mandalore could be reclaimed and rebuilt. Chapter 6. The Scattered Clans. This is the way. In the aftermath of the Great Purge, Mandalorian survivors found themselves facing questions their ancestors had never needed to ask. What did it mean to be Mandalorian when Mandalore itself was gone? How could they maintain their culture without a homeworld to return to? And perhaps most difficult, how could they pass their traditions to the next generation when doing so openly risked attracting Imperial attention and death? Different Mandalorian groups answered these questions in different ways, leading to the emergence of various factions, each with their own interpretation of what it meant to walk the Mandalorian path. Some clans maintained contact with each other, forming loose networks across the galaxy. Others isolated themselves completely, believing that survival required absolute secrecy. One group went further than most in embracing traditional values. They called themselves the Children of the Watch, though others would refer to them as religious zealots. The Children of the Watch traced their spiritual lineage back to Death Watch, the faction that had opposed Duchess Satine's pacifist reforms decades earlier. But while Death Watch had been a political movement seeking to reclaim power, the Children of the Watch transformed into something more akin to a religious order devoted to preserving the most ancient Mandalorian traditions. The Children of the Watch hadn't been on Mandalore during the Night of 1,000 Tears. They had been operating in secret on Concordia, Mandalore's moon, maintaining their traditional ways away from the conflicts and compromises that had consumed their home world. When they learned of the Purge, they interpreted it as divine judgment against Mandalorians who had strayed from the ancient path. Bo-Katan and her followers, they believed, had brought destruction upon Mandalore by accepting the Darksaber as a gift rather than winning it in combat, by compromising with the Empire rather than fighting to the death, by allowing Mandalorian culture to become diluted and weak. To prevent such catastrophes in the future, the Children of the Watch embraced the strictest possible interpretation of Mandalorian tradition. They established a new code, which they called simply the Way. Central to this code was a rule that seemed extreme even by traditional Mandalorian standards. A true follower of the Way could never remove their helmet in the presence of another living being. To do so meant being declared Darmanda, no longer Mandalorian, cast out from the culture forever. This rule had some historical basis. Ancient Mandalorians had indeed placed great importance on their armor and helmets, seeing them as more than mere protection. The armor represented their identity, their connection to Mandalorian culture. But whether ancient Mandalorians had literally never removed their helmets in front of others remained a matter of scholarly debate. The Children of the Watch, however, weren't interested in academic discussions. They believed that only by adhering to the strictest possible code could they ensure that Mandalorian culture survived. The Children of the Watch also emphasized another ancient tradition, the practice of taking in foundlings. When Mandalorian warriors encountered orphans, particularly children whose lives had been destroyed by war, they would adopt them and raise them as Mandalorians. This practice had deep roots in Mandalorian history, dating back to the Neo-Crusader movement when Mandalore the Ultimate had expanded Mandalorian culture beyond the Taung species. The Children of the Watch saw this as essential to their survival. With so few Mandalorians remaining after the Purge, foundlings represented the future of their people. One such foundling would eventually become central to Mandalore's fate. During the Clone Wars, a young human child had lived on a frontier world with his parents. When separatist battle droids attacked their settlement, the boy's parents hid him in a shelter while they tried to defend their home. He watched through a narrow opening as droids executed his parents. He waited in that shelter, certain the droids would find him next, knowing he had no way to defend himself. Then he saw something that would define the rest of his life. Mandalorian warriors, members of the Children of the Watch who happened to be in that sector, engaged the droids. They fought with precision and courage, destroying the battle droids that had murdered the boy's parents. One warrior found the child in his hiding spot. Instead of leaving him to an uncertain fate, the Mandalorian took the boy and raised him according to the Way, teaching him combat skills, survival techniques, and the Mandalorian code. The boy grew to become a warrior himself, known eventually by the name Din Djarin. Other Mandalorian groups took different approaches to survival. Some, like Bo-Katan and her followers, maintained their Mandalorian identity, but rejected the extreme interpretations embraced by the Children of the Watch. They saw the helmet rule as excessive, an invention rather than authentic tradition. They continued to wear their armor with pride, but they removed their helmets when practical or necessary, believing that Mandalorian identity came from actions and honor rather than rigid religious observance. These different Mandalorian factions rarely interacted. In fact, many were barely aware of each other's existence. The galaxy was vast, and surviving Mandalorians had scattered to its farthest reaches. When they did encounter each other, the meetings were often tense. Children of the Watch viewed other Mandalorians as having strayed from the true path. Those other Mandalorians saw the Children of the Watch as fanatics who had twisted Mandalorian culture into something unrecognizable. Yet despite their differences, all surviving Mandalorians shared certain fundamental elements. They valued combat skill and viewed strength as essential. They maintained fierce loyalty to their clan and creed, even when those clans consisted of only a handful of members. They wore armor, whether it was traditional Beskar or improvised alternatives when genuine Mandalorian iron couldn't be obtained. And they refused to forget Mandalore even though they couldn't return to their devastated homeworld. The Empire, satisfied that the Mandalorian threat had been eliminated, largely ignored the scattered survivors. Occasionally, an Imperial agent might recognize Mandalorian armor and attempt to collect a bounty. But for the most part, the Empire had moved on to other concerns. The galactic civil war between the Empire and the Rebel Alliance consumed Imperial attention. Mandalorians, reduced to isolated individuals and small groups, no longer rated as a significant threat worthy of systematic hunting. Some Mandalorians found work as bounty hunters, their combat skills and fearsome reputations making them highly sought after in the galactic underworld. Others served as mercenaries, hiring themselves out to various factions that needed elite warriors. A few managed to establish themselves on frontier worlds, building new lives far from their destroyed homeworld. They survived however they could, adapting to a galaxy that had tried to erase their existence. Din Djarin, the foundling who had been saved by the Children of the Watch, became one such bounty hunter. He worked throughout the Outer Rim, taking on jobs that most others wouldn't risk. His skill with weapons, his tactical intelligence, and his Mandalorian armor made him effective and dangerous. He operated alone, following the way as he understood it, never removing his helmet in front of others, honoring the creed that had saved him as a child. To most of the galaxy, the Mandalorians seemed to be nothing more than a legend from ancient history, occasionally represented by individual bounty hunters wearing distinctive armor. The once mighty culture that had fought the Jedi, been manipulated by the Sith, and nearly conquered the Republic, had been reduced to scattered individuals trying to preserve traditions that most people had forgotten ever existed. But Mandalorians have always been survivors. They had survived the defeat by Revan. They had survived the civil war between New Mandalorians and Death Watch. They had even survived the Night of 1,000 Tears, though barely, and deep within their culture, in the teachings passed from warrior to foundling, in honor they maintained and the oaths they took, the dream of Mandalore persisted. The way, as taught by the children of the Watch, included a prophecy. This is the way to the mines of Mandalore, where all Mandalorians are redeemed. They believed that one day Mandalorians would return to their home world. They would descend into the sacred mines of Mandalore, where the legendary living waters flowed. There, they would be cleansed and restored, ready to rebuild their culture and reclaim their place in the galaxy. Most Mandalorians considered this prophecy religious mythology, not a practical plan. Mandalore was supposedly poisoned, uninhabitable. The Empire had seen to that. Even if someone could reach the planet, what would they find except ruins and death? But prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves, especially when warriors refuse to accept that their story has ended. The scattered Mandalorian clans didn't know it yet, but events were already in motion that would bring them back together. The Darksaber still existed, held by an Imperial officer who didn't understand its true significance. Mandalorians still lived, carrying on their traditions despite everything. And the Force, that mystical energy field that had shaped so much of galactic history, was about to connect a lone Mandalorian bounty hunter with a mysterious child in ways neither could imagine. The Mandalorian story wasn't over. In fact, it was about to enter a new chapter, one that would determine whether their culture would finally fade into history or whether it could rise from the ashes like the mythosaur skull on their armor, terrible and magnificent, ready to reclaim what had been stolen from them. Chapter 7. Din Djarin. The reluctant Mandalore. 5 years after the Battle of Endor, the galaxy was slowly recovering from the Empire's fall. The New Republic struggled to establish order across thousands of systems. The Empire had fractured into warlords and Imperial remnants holding isolated territories. And in the lawless Outer Rim, far from the New Republic's influence, bounty hunters and mercenaries found plentiful work. Din Djarin was one such bounty hunter. He had built a reputation for efficiency and discretion, taking on high-risk bounties that others avoided. He followed the way as taught by his covert, never removing his helmet, honoring his armor and his creed. To him, being Mandalorian meant following these rules absolutely. He had been saved by Mandalorians who lived by this code, and he would honor their sacrifice by maintaining it throughout his life. Then he received a job that changed everything. A mysterious client backed by Imperial remnant forces hired him to retrieve a target of significant value. The client provided minimal information, just a tracking fob and a location. What Din found on that remote world was the last thing he expected. A child, barely 50 years old by the standards of his species, but appearing infant-like despite his age. The child belonged to the same mysterious species as the legendary Jedi Master Yoda. Though Din didn't know this immediately, what he did know was that this small, seemingly helpless being was Force-sensitive, capable of using abilities that Din associated with Jedi sorcery. Despite his orders to deliver the child to the Imperial remnants, Din made a choice that violated everything about his profession as a bounty hunter. He rescued the child, whom he began calling Grogu, and became the foundling's protector. This decision put Din at odds with powerful enemies. The Imperial client who had commissioned the bounty, an officer named Moff Gideon, wanted Grogu for experiments involving the child's Force-sensitive blood. Other bounty hunters, eager for the substantial reward, pursued Din across the Outer Rim. Din fought them all, protecting Grogu while searching for a way to return the child to his own kind. During this journey, Din encountered other Mandalorians for the first time since leaving his covert. On the moon, Trask he met Bo-Katan Kryze and 2 other Mandalorian warriors. What should have been a joyful meeting to fellow Mandalorians instead became profoundly uncomfortable. Bo-Katan and her companions removed their helmets casually, treating their armor as equipment rather than sacred vestments. To Din, raised by the Children of the Watch, this was shocking and wrong. How could they call themselves Mandalorians if they didn't follow the way? Bo-Katan, in turn, was dismissive of Din's beliefs. She explained that he was part of the Children of the Watch, a zealous religious sect that had broken away from mainstream Mandalorian culture. Real Mandalorians, she told him, didn't follow such extreme interpretations. She called his beliefs a cult. But despite their philosophical differences, Bo-Katan saw an opportunity in Din. She explained the history of the Darksaber, how it had been taken from her by Moff Gideon during the Night of 1,000 Tears. She needed Din's help to track down Gideon and reclaim the blade. In exchange, she would help him find Jedi who could train Grogu. The alliance was temporary and uneasy. Din learned about the broader Mandalorian history he had never been taught, about the wars, the betrayals, the near extinction of his people. He learned that the rules he had considered absolute were actually one interpretation among many. This knowledge shook his certainty, but didn't break his commitment to the way as he understood it. He had been saved by warriors who followed these rules, and he would honor that debt. Eventually, Din's search for Jedi led him to Ahsoka Tano, a former Jedi Padawan who had survived Order 66 and the Empire's Jedi Purge. Ahsoka tested Grogu and confirmed his Force sensitivity, but she refused to train him. She had seen what attachment could do, how it had corrupted Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader. She feared that Grogu's obvious attachment to Din might lead the child down a similar dark path. Instead, Ahsoka directed Din to an ancient Jedi temple on Tython, where Grogu might reach out through the Force to any surviving Jedi who could sense his call. Din brought Grogu to Tython, and there, sitting on a seeing stone atop the temple ruins, Grogu meditated and sent his message across the galaxy. But Grogu's Force signature also attracted Moff Gideon. The Imperial officer arrived with a Star Destroyer and forces of Dark Troopers, advanced combat droids that proved nearly unstoppable. Gideon captured Grogu, destroying Din's ship in the process. For Din, this was more than a professional failure. Grogu had become like a son to him. The attachment Ahsoka had warned about had already formed, and now the child had been taken by the very enemy they had been trying to avoid. Din assembled a team to rescue Grogu. He brought together former allies, Cara Dune, Fennec Shand, Boba Fett, himself wearing Mandalorian armor, though his claim to Mandalorian identity remained controversial, and Bo-Katan with her warriors. Together, they assaulted Gideon's light cruiser in a desperate mission to save the child. During the infiltration of Gideon's ship, Din confronted Moff Gideon directly. The two dueled, and Din proved the better warrior. He defeated Gideon and claimed the Darksaber, not by intention, but by the circumstance of combat. Only afterward did he realize what he had done. By defeating the Darksaber's wielder in combat, Din had become, by ancient Mandalorian tradition, the rightful ruler of all Mandalorian clans. Bo-Katan, who had fought alongside Din specifically to reclaim the Darksaber for herself, saw her plans collapse. The blade couldn't be gifted. It had to be won in combat. Din offered to simply give her the Darksaber, but Bo-Katan refused. Such a transfer would be meaningless, wouldn't legitimize her rule, and might even be seen as a curse. The situation seemed impossible. Din didn't want to be Mandalore and had no interest in ruling Mandalorians. But he couldn't just give the blade to someone who wanted it. Before they could resolve this dilemma, a Jedi responded to Grogu's call. Luke Skywalker, who had been rebuilding the Jedi Order after the Empire's fall, arrived in a single X-Wing fighter. He carved through Gideon's dark troopers with his green lightsaber, demonstrating power that awed even experienced warriors like Din and Bo-Katan. Luke offered to take Grogu and train him in the ways of the Jedi. For Din, this meant saying goodbye to the child he had protected and come to love. He removed his helmet, violating the strictest rule of the way, so that Grogu could see his face at least once. It was a moment of profound sacrifice, choosing his connection to Grogu over his religious adherence to the code that had defined his life. As Luke departed with Grogu, Din was left with questions about his identity and his future. He had broken the way. He possessed the Darksaber, and he had no idea what any of it meant. Din returned to his covert seeking guidance. He confessed to the armorer, the keeper of their traditions, that he had removed his helmet. She declared him Darmanda, no longer Mandalorian. The way was the way, and breaking it had consequences. But she also told him of a path to redemption. If he traveled to the mines of Mandalore and bathed in the living waters, he could be forgiven and restored to Mandalorian identity. This presented a problem. Everyone believed Mandalore was poisoned, that its surface was toxic and deadly. The Empire had spread these stories to keep people away. But the armorer insisted that the old ways spoke of redemption in the living waters, and if Din wished to reclaim his place among Mandalorians, he would have to attempt this seemingly impossible pilgrimage. Around this same time, Grogu made a choice of his own. Luke Skywalker had been training him, but the child could not forget Din. The attachment Ahsoka had warned about proved stronger than Jedi discipline. When offered a choice between becoming a Jedi and returning to Din, Grogu chose his guardian. Luke, understanding that forcing the child to stay would violate everything the Jedi stood for, allowed Grogu to return to the man who had become his father in all but biology. Reunited with Grogu, Din decided to pursue his redemption. He traveled to Mandalore itself, the world he had never seen. The home world he had been taught was destroyed and poisonous. What he found there surprised him. Yes, Mandalore had been devastated. The cities were ruins. The landscape was harsh and dangerous, but it wasn't poisoned. The Empire had lied, spread propaganda to keep Mandalorians away from their homeworld and to hide what the Empire had done. Din wasn't alone in this discovery. Bo-Katan, following her own path and dealing with her own regrets about failing her people, encountered Din on Mandalore. When Din fell into an ancient mine, Bo-Katan rescued him, and together they witnessed something that legends claimed impossible. A living mythosaur, one of the ancient beasts that the first Mandalorians had conquered millennia ago. The creature had survived in the depths of Mandalore's mines, proof that their world's heart still beat despite everything done to destroy it. Din and Bo-Katan reached the living waters in the mines of Mandalore. There, according to the ancient traditions, Din bathed and recited the creed, seeking redemption for removing his helmet. The armorer, when later told of this, accepted his redemption. Din Djarin was Mandalorian once more, cleansed of his transgression and restored to his people. But more importantly, the journey proved that Mandalore could be reclaimed. The planet wasn't dead. The poisoning was Imperial propaganda. Mandalorians could return home if they had the courage to try. This revelation sparked something in the scattered clans. Word spread, carried by Bo-Katan and Din, that Mandalore awaited its people. Slowly, Mandalorians began emerging from hiding. Some came from remote systems where they had been living in isolation. Others abandoned their careers as bounty hunters and mercenaries, drawn by the possibility of returning to their ancestral home. Even Mandalorians from different factions, followers of the Way and those who rejected it, began gathering on Mandalore, united by their shared desire to reclaim what the Empire had taken. The Empire, or what remained of it, didn't intend to let this happen peacefully. Moff Gideon had survived his defeat aboard the light cruiser. He had established a secret base on Mandalore itself, continuing his experiments and building an army of advanced dark troopers wearing armor that mimicked Beskar. When he learned that Mandalorians were returning to their home world, he saw an opportunity to eliminate them all at once. The resulting battle became known as the retaking of Mandalore. Mandalorian forces, led by Bo-Katan and including Din Djarin, fought Gideon's Imperial remnant troops across their ruined homeworld. The fighting was fierce and desperate. Gideon had advantages in technology and defensive position, but the Mandalorians fought with something Gideon's forces lacked. They were fighting for their home, for their identity, for their future as a people. During the climactic battle, Din faced Gideon again, this time with Bo-Katan at his side. Together, they fought the Imperial officer who had orchestrated the Night of 1,000 Tears, who had taken the Darksaber, who had tried to ensure Mandalorian extinction. In the end, Gideon was defeated, his base destroyed, his Dark Trooper army eliminated. The Darksaber, that ancient symbol of Mandalorian leadership, was destroyed in the battle, crushed by rubble when Gideon's base collapsed. Some might have seen this as a tragedy, the loss of their most important cultural artifact. But others recognized a different truth. The Darksaber's destruction freed Mandalorians from its curse. No longer would clans fight over who possessed it. No longer would questions of legitimate succession based on combat victory paralyze their leadership. With Gideon defeated and the Darksaber gone, Bo-Katan Kryze stood as leader of the United Mandalorian clans. She hadn't won the Darksaber in combat as tradition demanded, but she had led Mandalorians back to their homeworld. She had fought to free Mandalore from Imperial control, and she had earned respect through actions rather than ancient symbols. The clans accepted her leadership not because of the Darksaber, but because she had proven herself worthy. Din Djarin, the reluctant Mandalore who had never wanted to rule, found a different path. He continued his work, now with Grogu at his side as his apprentice. Together they traveled the galaxy, taking on jobs, helping those in need, and representing Mandalorian honor through their actions rather than their titles. Din had begun his journey as a simple bounty hunter, following rules he didn't fully understand. He ended it as a warrior who understood that being Mandalorian meant more than following codes. It meant fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves, protecting the innocent, and honoring the culture that had saved him as a child. Chapter 8. The Future, Rising from Ashes. The Mandalorians have reclaimed their homeworld, but reclaiming territory is easier than rebuilding a civilization. The cities remain ruins. The infrastructure that sustained millions has been destroyed. The population that once filled Mandalore's domed cities has been reduced to a few thousand scattered survivors. The task ahead of them is enormous, perhaps even more challenging than the battles they fought to get here. But Mandalorians have always thrived on challenges. Their entire history is a story of overcoming impossible obstacles, of surviving catastrophes that should have destroyed them. The Taung lost their homeworld on Notron and built a new civilization on Mandalore. They were defeated by Revan and survived as scattered clans. They endured centuries of internal conflict and external manipulation by Sith. They survived the Night of 1,000 Tears. They can survive rebuilding as well. Bo-Katan Kryze faces the difficult task of uniting Mandalorians who have spent decades developing different interpretations of their shared culture. The Children of the Watch maintain their strict adherence to the Way, including their controversial helmet rule. Other Mandalorians follow more flexible traditions, removing their helmets when practical. Some clans prioritize combat and conquest, believing Mandalore should reclaim its warrior legacy. Others advocate for a more measured approach, focusing on rebuilding infrastructure before considering external military operations. These differences create tension, but they also represent strength through diversity. Mandalorian culture has never been monolithic. Even in ancient times, different clans had different traditions while maintaining their shared identity. The challenge isn't eliminating these differences, but finding ways for different Mandalorian factions to coexist and work toward common goals. The Great Forge, an ancient Mandalorian facility for working Beskar and creating armor, has been relit. This symbolic act represents more than just practical manufacturing. The Great Forge is where Mandalorians create their armor, where they forge the identity that has sustained them through millennia. By rekindling this flame, Mandalorians signal their intention not just to survive, but to rebuild their culture in its full glory. Beskar mining has resumed in some of Mandalore's deeper caverns. This presents both opportunity and challenge. Beskar is one of the most valuable materials in the galaxy, virtually indestructible and highly sought after by wealthy collectors and military forces. Mandalorians could trade Beskar for resources they need to rebuild. But Beskar is also fundamental to Mandalorian identity. The armor that has protected countless warriors, the weapons that have become legendary throughout the galaxy. Trading away their sacred metal feels like selling pieces of their culture. Bo-Katan must navigate these economic and cultural concerns while also dealing with external threats. The New Republic, though nominally friendly, views the resurgent Mandalorians with some concern. History remembers the Mandalorian Wars, when Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders nearly conquered the Outer Rim. Republic officials worry that a reunited Mandalore might become aggressive again. Bo-Katan must convince them that modern Mandalorians seek peaceful coexistence while maintaining enough military strength to defend their reclaimed homeworld. criminal organizations see opportunity in Mandalore's rebuilding. The planet's strategic location and Beskar resources make it valuable to syndicates and cartels. Some have attempted to establish operations on Mandalore, hoping to exploit the chaos of reconstruction. Mandalorian warriors have repelled these incursions, but the attempts continue. Pirates and raiders probe Mandalorian space, testing their defenses and looking for weaknesses. Perhaps the most significant challenge is demographic. The Night of 1,000 Tears killed millions of Mandalorians. The survivors, scattered across the galaxy, number in the thousands rather than millions. Rebuilding a planetary population from such a small base will take generations. Some Mandalorians advocate for aggressive adoption of foundlings, following the ancient tradition but on a massive scale. They argue that Mandalorian identity has never been about blood. Anyone willing to follow the creed and live the culture can become Mandalorian. Others worry that expanding too quickly might dilute what makes them Mandalorian, that they risk losing their identity in their desperation to restore their numbers. The discovery of the living mythosaur has deep cultural significance. In Mandalorian mythology, the mythosaur represents their people's strength and destiny. The ancient Mandalorians conquered these beasts and took their skull as their symbol. That a mythosaur survived beneath Mandalore through all the devastation above suggests that Mandalorian culture too can survive seemingly impossible catastrophes. Some see the mythosaur as an omen, a sign that Mandalore's glory will return. Others simply see it as a dangerous predator that must be carefully managed as they rebuild above its lair. Education of the next generation has become a priority. Children and foundlings are being taught traditional Mandalorian combat skills, cultural history, and the various interpretations of the creed, but they're also learning engineering, medicine, agriculture, and other practical skills needed to sustain a civilization. This dual focus, honoring the warrior traditions while developing the broader expertise needed for a functioning society, represents a balance that previous Mandalorian generations often failed to achieve. The destruction of the Darksaber, initially seen by some as a disaster, has paradoxically made it easier to unite the clans. Without the legendary blade as a symbol of singular authority, leadership must be earned through consensus and proven ability rather than possession of an artifact. Bo-Katan leads not because she holds the Darksaber, but because Mandalorians choose to follow her. This creates a more stable foundation for governance, though it also means her authority can be challenged through political means rather than just combat. Some Mandalorians have chosen not to return to their home world. They prefer their lives as bounty hunters, mercenaries, or settlers on other worlds. They maintain their Mandalorian identity through their armor and adherence to their personal interpretation of the creed, but they don't see their future on Mandalore itself. Bo-Katan has accepted this, recognizing that Mandalorian culture has always included warriors who wandered the galaxy. These diaspora Mandalorians serve as ambassadors of sorts, representing their people across countless systems and maintaining connections to the broader galactic community. Din Djarin and Grogu represent a unique aspect of Mandalore's future, the blending of different galactic traditions. Grogu is being raised Mandalorian while also being trained in the Force. This combination recalls Tara Vizsla, but it's also something new. Where Tara was a Mandalorian who became a Jedi, Grogu is being raised with both traditions from the beginning. What this will mean for his development and for relations between Mandalorians and any future Jedi remains to be seen. The Mandalorian government, such as it is, remains informal and clan-based. Bo-Katan holds authority through respect and consensus rather than formal legal structures. This works for now, while the population is small and everyone knows each other. But as Mandalore grows, more formal governance structures will become necessary. Some debate whether they should establish a monarchy with the Mandalore holding absolute power, create a council representing different clans, or develop some hybrid system. These discussions are ongoing and sometimes contentious. Relations with the Jedi, should any survive and eventually establish themselves again, remain complicated. Centuries of conflict between Jedi and Mandalorians have left deep cultural memories. The fact that Luke Skywalker helped save Grogu and showed respect to Mandalorian culture suggests that future relations might be less adversarial than in the past. But many Mandalorians remain suspicious of Jedi, viewing them as hypocritical sorcerers who preach peace while carrying weapons. Building trust between these two warrior cultures will take time and continued positive interactions. The shadow of the Sith lingers over Mandalorian history. The Sith Emperor manipulated them into the Mandalorian Wars. Darth Maul conquered their homeworld and corrupted Death Watch. The Empire, ruled by the Sith Lord Palpatine, perpetrated the Night of 1,000 Tears. This pattern of Sith exploitation has shaped Mandalorian culture in ways both obvious and subtle. Some Mandalorians recognize this history and consciously work to avoid being manipulated by dark side users again. Others remain unaware of how often Sith have used Mandalorians as weapons in their schemes. As Mandalore rebuilds, they must define what kind of society they want to become. Will they return to the warrior culture that defined them for millennia, potentially risking another cycle of conquest and defeat? Or will they find a new path that honors their martial traditions while developing other aspects of their civilization? Can they be Mandalorians without being defined solely by warfare? These questions don't have simple answers. Different Mandalorian factions advocate for different visions of their future, but perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one vision over another, but in accepting that Mandalorian identity is broad enough to encompass multiple approaches. Warriors and artisans, mystics and engineers, wanderers and settlers, all can be Mandalorian if they embrace the core values that have sustained their culture through thousands of years: strength through adversity, loyalty to clan and creed, and the determination to survive no matter how impossible the odds. Closing. This is the way. The history of the Mandalorian spans thousands of years and encompasses triumphs and tragedies beyond measure. From their origins as the Taung on ancient Coruscant, through their transformation into one of the galaxy's most feared warrior cultures, through their near extinction at Imperial hands, they have endured. Their story is one of resilience, of a people who refuse to vanish no matter how many times history tries to erase them. The Mandalorians have been manipulated by Sith, opposed by Jedi, conquered by empires, and betrayed by their own people. They have made mistakes, catastrophic errors in judgment that cost millions of lives. They have been both heroes and villains, defenders and conquerors, saviors and destroyers. Their legacy is complicated, their reputation deserved and yet insufficient to capture the full complexity of their culture. What makes Mandalorians remarkable isn't just their combat prowess or their legendary armor. It's their fundamental refusal to accept defeat as final. Every time they have been broken, they have rebuilt. Every time they have been scattered, they have eventually reunited. The specifics change. New leaders emerge, new interpretations of the creed develop, new challenges demand new solutions. But the core of Mandalorian identity persists. They are warriors, they are survivors, and they are defined not by where they come from or what species birthed them, but by the choices they make and the creed they follow. This is the way is more than just a phrase repeated by the children of the Watch. It's a statement of cultural continuity, a recognition that Mandalorians today walk paths forged by countless generations before them. Every warrior who wears Beskar armor carries the legacy of Mandalore I, conquering the mythosaurs. Every foundling adopted into the culture echoes Mandalore the Ultimate's Neo-Crusader movement. Every leader who unites squabbling clans follows in Tara Vizsla's footsteps. The Sith tried to use Mandalorians as weapons in their schemes. The Empire tried to annihilate them completely, and yet here they stand on their reclaimed homeworld under open skies they once thought they would never see again. The journey ahead is long and uncertain. Rebuilding Mandalore will take generations. Many challenges remain. But if history has taught us anything about Mandalorians, it's this: they will endure. They always have. They always will. This is their way. This has always been their way. And this will remain their way long after the current generation has passed into history and become legends to inspire future Mandalorian warriors. The story of the Mandalorians isn't over. In truth, it may never be over, as long as someone wears the armor, follows the creed, and carries forward the traditions forged in the ancient conflicts between Tong and Jel on a world once called Notron. The Mandalorians have survived because they understand something fundamental. Culture isn't about blood or birthplace. Culture is about choice, about deciding who you want to be and having the strength to become it, no matter the obstacles in your path. And so Mandalore rises from ashes once more. The great forge burns bright. Warriors train foundlings in ancient traditions. Engineers rebuild ruined cities. Historians record the stories that must not be forgotten. Life returns to a world that was supposed to be dead, and in the deepest mines, beneath millions of tons of stone, a mythosaur stirs, ancient, powerful, and waiting to see what these Mandalorians will become. This is the way. This has always been the way, and the galaxy hasn't seen the last of what Mandalorians can accomplish when they stand united, armored in Beskar and determination, ready to forge their destiny through strength, honor, and the refusal to surrender. Thank you for watching this journey through Mandalorian history. If you enjoyed this comprehensive exploration of the warriors who have shaped the Star Wars galaxy, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the lore of that galaxy, far, far away. May your armor remain strong and your resolve unshaken. This is the way.